So baseball has always been a big part of my life. My first experience was a minor league baseball game in a town about 30 minutes from where I grew up. And I was really interested in the aspect that they play with the ball. When I was a little kid, I had a fascination with that. So my mom made a decision early in my life to take me to all 30 of the Major League Baseball stadiums that are in the United States. This is a map of where they are. You can clearly see, there's a bit of a clump, but relatively they are throughout the entire country. So my first game was when I was 5 years old, and we went to the Milwaukee Brewers stadium just for a day trip. And it was really just, at this point we were still trying to figure out, I guess we hadn't fully decided that we wanted to go to all of them, but my interest was peaking, so I figured we'd go to one of the closest big league games. And it started off, we traveled to all the local stadiums. So based on that map, we traveled to the two Cubs stadiums, and the Twins were the closest ones. So with those, it was simply day trips where we could just drive there, go to a game, stay in a hotel if we needed to, and then drive back. So soon it became a tradition that every year my mom and I, the one on the left, would take some sort of trip where we would go to the stadiums. Unfortunately, with the timing of baseball, it is during the summer mostly, and our trips would be towards the end of the summer that my dad was his busiest time for work, so we didn't get to go on all of them. With a lot of the trips, any of them where there was a lot of driving required, he wanted to tag along because he didn't want my mom driving that much. But it was always my mom and I going to every stadium. So it got pretty serious, and our first big trip was we went out east. So on this trip, we flew from Milwaukee to Detroit, which is the stadium on the left. From Detroit, my mom and I drove a car to Pittsburgh, where we went to a game there and stayed one day in that city. Then we drove up to Toronto, where we spent 2 days. We went to the stadium and then went to the big aquarium there. And funny story about that game, I don't know how it happened, but during the game went into the ninth inning. The last out was recorded, and we left the stadium. And right next to the stadium, there's the Rogers Center, which is a big, tall, almost like the Space Needle in Seattle. And you could overlook into the stadium. When we went there, and we went up into the top, and we were looking at the stadium, we were trying to figure out why there were people still in the stadium. And we were trying to figure out maybe they're playing like a softball game or something. And when we got done, we asked somebody, and the game had gone into extra innings, and we left the game without knowing that it was still tied. After Toronto, we then drove to Niagara Falls, drove back down to Detroit, and then flew back to Milwaukee. That was our big trip, but still relatively kind of close. The next one was one of our big trips. We went to Southern California. So I went out there and played in a baseball event, and while we were there, we visited the Dodger Stadium, and then we went to the Angels Stadium where we saw my favorite team, the Twins, play, and then we also drove down to San Diego where we watched a game there. That was probably our third biggest trip, I'll say. Our second biggest trip was we flew out to Seattle, went to a game in Seattle, and then drove down the coast, which the timing of it was pretty cool. My parents rented a car and drove down the coast of California to the West Coast on their honeymoon, and this was about the time of their anniversary. So we drove down the coast and went to the Oakland Coliseum, and then as well as the San Francisco Stadium. With the San Francisco Stadium, so we were Wisconsin people in California during the winter, and so you can see we're not wearing a lot of clothes. And we go to the stadium, we're taking the subway, and we realize that everybody around us is dressed like they're going out in the winter in Wisconsin. We're not thinking anything of it. We're like, it's no big deal. It's just the summer in California. Well, the stadium is located right on the San Francisco Bay, and I don't know when, maybe the second or third inning, and if the wind switched, but it was just turned really cold for us and not what we had all expected. So we ended up having to go to the pro shop and getting a sweatshirt that we passed around throughout the innings. And we didn't even sit in our seats. We had seats pretty high up, and we walked down and we stood for the remainder of that game to try and stay warmer. So after that trip, we only had 3 stadiums remaining, and due to bad luck or just randomness, we had Boston, Atlanta, and Houston. So a kind of a horn going around the east side of the United States. So the plan was to fly to Boston, fly to Atlanta, fly to Houston, and then go back home. And so we flew to Boston, went to the game, had no problem. And during that night, for some reason, my mom woke up she got a notification on her phone, and she realized that our flight had been canceled from Boston to Atlanta. Now, we were supposed to fly into Atlanta, go to a game that night, and fly out the next morning, so we didn't have a whole lot of extra time. So she was on the phone for a couple hours in the morning before I even woke up and was trying to figure out what we were going to do. And the plan was that if we go to the airport, they might be able to get us somewhere to get down to Atlanta. We got to the airport, they said, well, we'll have you go to Baltimore. In Baltimore, maybe they'll help you get to Atlanta. Well, we quickly realized that going to Baltimore, they just wanted us out of their hair in Boston. They didn't want to deal with us. So we got to Baltimore. Well, they recommended maybe if you go to Tampa, you can get to Atlanta. So we flew to Tampa. We were in Tampa for about 13 minutes, got on a flight, went to Atlanta, and made it to the game with about 20 minutes to spare before the first pitch. So we ended up, that was a couple extra flights. So we ended up going Boston to Baltimore, Baltimore to Tampa, Tampa to Atlanta for us to go to the game. And then we were in Atlanta for less than 15 hours, and we flew to Houston. Due to that chaotic ending, and my mom kind of freaking out, not thinking that we were going to do it. And at that point, that was our last summer because she wanted to do it before I graduated. That first pitch in Houston, the middle picture, was pretty sentimental. It was a cool moment, just thinking about the achievement over the last 13 years, how we had traveled the United States together and gone to all the games. I'm thankful. I'm extremely thankful for what my parents have provided for me. The experience is something I'll never forget. And looking back as I'm a little bit older now, I understand how much stress and planning and ultimately traveling went into it. There's nobody else in the world I'd rather do it with. Thank you.
Okay.